guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Charlie Louise and welcome back to the Managing Worry series. This is the second video on managing worry. If you haven't seen the first, the link is in the description below. This video is really helpful for anyone who has a worry and it feels quite real, but is something that perhaps we can't do anything about, we don't really have any control over. And what this technique does is it helps us to look at our worries and to try and see them in a more rational way, and just helps us to see how much of a threat that worry might be to us. And it works by engaging the more rational side of the brain. So normally when we worry, we're only engaging that more emotional side of our brain. It's a lot younger than the more rational side of our brain. It developed a lot longer ago. Things like the limbic system, that kind of thing, and really they just spark up whenever they sense a threat, like a worry popping in. That is our body responding to a threat, which is why we can feel anxious when we are worrying. And what this technique does is it aims to bring in the older part of our brain, the more rational side, the side we've developed to problem solve, to think things through. Before we get into the video, it's just a reminder that I am a trainee psychology practitioner, and although I've worked in the field of mental health for a while, these videos are meant for educational and entertainment purposes only, and if you feel it would be helpful, please do seek the support of a healthcare professional. So for those of you who love words or who really like numbers, this is going to be a technique that you guys really get on with and really like. If you are a number hater or you're phobic of words, that's okay. Just try and pick the side that you like the most, or make use of both, whatever feels like it would be most helpful for you guys. And it involves using this basic kind of equation. So we have the threat level equals brackets chance times consequences divided by coping skills. So that sounds a little bit complicated, but when we go through it, hopefully it will become a bit clearer. And like I said, if you don't like numbers or maths, ignore the equation. It doesn't really matter. You'll still get a lot of benefit just through working through sort of the questions that we ask. So the first thing we want to do is look into the consequences. What is the worst possible thing that could happen if this worry became reality? If your brain automatically spews up one answer, try and dig a bit deeper. Okay, and what would be so bad if that did happen? And then what would be so bad? Really dig quite deep, and that can be quite a powerful process, but it can sometimes be quite emotional as well to realise those things. So try and bear that in mind when you are doing this. And then once you feel like you have gotten to the bottom, just try rating that on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 means it's not a problem if that did happen, and 10 means it would be so horrible, it would be off the charts. So for example, let's say we were really worried about going out of the house because we were worried that we would run into our ex and we would have an embarrassing scene. Now we might think, okay, what would be so bad if that did happen? Well, it would just be quite embarrassing. I might not be able to cope. Well, I guess I'd probably just turn red. From the amount of Eating with My Ex episodes I've seen, we probably would just say a brief hello. But having gone through that, we think actually maybe the consequences of that interaction wouldn't be that bad. Maybe it would only be a 5 and not the 7 I thought initially. Next, we need to explore chance. How likely is it for that worst case scenario to actually happen? And this is something that will take a little bit of digging. It might take a bit of research depending what your worry is. So we really want to try and disengage our emotional brain in this scenario and really think about what it is quite rationally. So we might want to look up stats on good websites. Or we might just want to really think about how likely is it to happen. So in the example of our scenario, we might be thinking, okay, well, do we live in the same town? Because if we live on opposite ends of the UK, then that's really unlikely. But let's say for argument's sake we do live in the same town, then we'd want to be thinking, did we go to a lot of the same hangouts, or do we just go there because we were together? Do we live on opposite sides of the town? Do we have a lot of the same friends? Really sort of try and funnel around that. And once more, just rate that on that scale of 0 to 10, where 0 means it's really unlikely to happen, it's probably not going to happen, and 10 means it's definitely going to happen, this thing that I'm worrying about. So from going through that process and really exploring it, hopefully what we've realised is that maybe initially we thought it was an 8 out of 10, we were really likely to run into them, and then once we've gone through that process, we've realised that maybe it's only a 4, maybe it's quite unlikely. Okay, so we've looked at the chances, we've looked at the consequences. Now we're on to the final bit, which is looking at our coping skills, how we might be able to manage that situation. Because what we often do when we're thinking about worry, we often think of how likely is it to happen and what would be the worst case scenario if that did happen. But what we rarely think about is whether we would be able to cope if that did happen. And that's really important, as often we're able to cope with a lot more than what we give ourselves credit for. So just as we did before, think of this on a scale of 0 to 10. Only this time, the 0 is where I can't cope at all, and 10 is I can absolutely cope with that. I've got all the skills and resources I need. And if we thought, actually I don't feel like I could cope, really try and dig around that. We often really underestimate the coping skills and the abilities that we do have. So think, have I been through any similar situations before? How did I manage those? Could I draw on resources from sort of my friends or my family? Could any of them help me? Could I get any advice from charities or other organisations? And if we are noticing that some of our own coping skills are missing, maybe that could be a really good opportunity to think about how we could build those coping skills to help with us being able to cope. So perhaps that's, well, I think I would really struggle with this, but what might be the avenues of support that I could get to help with managing that? Would that mean that my coping skills would go up if I knew where I could go? Or I feel like I might turn bright red, I might not be able to talk at all. So is there anything that I could do to help prepare me for that situation that would be helpful? So when we went through that originally, perhaps we thought our coping skills were only a 3. We weren't really able to cope with it at all. But having gone through all of that, we realised that actually it's more like a 9, and we would absolutely be able to cope in that situation. The final step, if you are using numbers that is just to try and calculate out that equation. And that's why it's really helpful as we go through this to think about what our answer was before and what our answer was afterwards, just to help with us really understanding that process and how things might have changed. If you were keeping track of this, so far we've got that the chances of this happening was quite high, so they believe that it was a 7, and the consequences of that happening was an 8, so quite high consequences. And in terms of our coping skills that we can bring into that situation, we rated our coping skills as a 3. So that would have meant that the threat level that it was for us was 18%. So actually, just looking at that, that's quite a low number. That's not as high as I thought that number was going to turn out. That in itself can be quite powerful. But now let's look at what it is having gone through that whole process. So in terms of what the chances of that happening, we realised that it was actually more of a 5. Like, it probably could happen, but it also equally was likely that it wouldn't happen. And in terms of the consequences, we think that that is actually a 4. And then when thinking about our coping skills, having gone through that process, we realised that we've handled a lot of embarrassing situations in the past. And now we've rated our coping skills as a 9. So if we do the calculation for that, we'll realise that it comes out as only 2.2% threat. That's a lot lower than the 18% that we started with. Even if it was still at that 18%, that can still be quite reassuring that it is a lot lower than perhaps the threat level that we might have been playing out in our brain. So engaging this rational side of our brain and really trying to explore things, really trying to break it down, do a proper risk analysis to work out what the real threat is something that can be really helpful with putting our worries into perspective. And obviously it can be done with a lot of different sort of worries that you might have. If you do have any questions about that, just pop them in the comments below and I'll try my best to answer them. Please sort of like and share if you found this video helpful, just to help others find this content. And until next time, stay kind.